what I want to talk to you about today is how we're using information technology to engage volunteers, okay? Basically, web and mobile apps, because that's where we are at the moment in our evolution. The system we have built, we've labeled Volunteer Attract. That's a relatively new name for it. We actually have a website, volunteerattract.com, which has nothing on it at the moment, but will shortly, coming soon. And there's a team of people working on this. As I say, Kyle is developing most of the software with help from other people. I talk about it a lot. And Fred McGarry is the executive director of the Center for Community Mapping, which is also very involved with this. So it's a combination effort of the University of Waterloo and the Center for Community Mapping, both based in Waterloo and both working very closely together. Can I have a next? Thanks. So I'd like to talk about volunteering and the web and mobile. There's a lot of places, I think, that information technology can help the volunteer community. I don't know all of them. I keep learning new things all the time. But 3 of them are attracting volunteers, what I call the marriage broker function, connecting a volunteer to a position. The recognition function, which we've just come across relatively recently within the last couple of years, where we say, gee, you did a great job. How we talk about that is, of course, a little different. And the third one is management of the volunteers. You have a ton of volunteer positions, and of course, volunteers can be somewhat finicky. You know, might say, gee, I can only come on Wednesday afternoons between 2 and 3, and oh, the odd Friday. And so you've got to manage that whole thing. I've dealt with some people who have that kind of problem. Fortunately, I've not had to build the software for that one. The person who's doing that, and we'll talk about it later, I understand, is Poppy, and she's not here at the moment, but I saw her a few minutes ago. Poppy Graham. I'm going to talk first of all community level volunteering, and then I'm going to talk about how, I'm sorry, I'll move around a bit so you don't have to look through me here. Can you see it okay? Talk about community level volunteering, and then talk about how we're going to make that Ontario-wide, but leaving in the community feel, because that's, to me, the most important part. I'm a very community-oriented person in a lot of things I do. Recognizing that stuff comes from the bottom up. It does not come from the top down. And if you've ever worked in a university, you'll realize that that is true. You don't sell to the president, you sell to the faculty, okay? If you're, say, a company selling whatever, computers, for example. So we can go to the next one. So volunteer attraction, in other words, the concept of bringing a volunteer together with the positions that are available or might be of interest to that volunteer. First of all, I'd say volunteering is a community activity to be very important that you work at the community level. The volunteer needs are best defined at the community level, and that's community by community. There is no typical community, I've discovered. The other day I discovered that the city of Hamilton, for example, their volunteer effort is looking for aircraft mechanics. Scratch, scratch. The Warplane Museum. You know, but as far as I know, in Kitchener-Waterloo or many of the other places, airplane mechanics are not something you're asking them to volunteer for. So it varies a lot, but that's just a nice, simple example. How do we attract volunteers to volunteer positions? Well, I always remember when we get into this business, it was all paper-based. And there were big books, call them libraries, if you will, in city halls and libraries and what have you. There were some information systems, don't misunderstand me, but say, when we got involved about a decade ago. Well, that's a little bit archaic, and you can imagine how many people you would attract because they don't know, number one, where to go to look, and number two, are they going to go through all those big books? No. So we've got to make it far more accessible, and the way to do it is to go online. And, you know, again, I'm saying some pretty obvious things to most of you, but, and of course, you want it 24/7. We live in a world now where you don't know when people are sleeping awake. You can just guarantee it won't be when you think it is. We want to connect the volunteers to volunteer positions. So again, we want to make it easy. You can do it from wherever you are. You want to do 2 things. Basically, you want the volunteer to talk about themselves in a nice way, and then you want to be able to connect them to the positions. There's no trees in here. Huh? The next one, Cody, please. Volunteer centers, of course, funding is often an issue from what little I understand. And so what you want to do is minimize cost for doing any of this attraction, and you also want to minimize the need for expertise. That is, you don't want to have a bunch of computer geeks on staff if you can avoid it. They're expensive. It just doesn't make sense. And so the objective, as I say, is not to have that, is to put the computer geeks someplace else. We have built a thing which I say we just recently labeled Volunteer Attract, and that's our logo. I don't know if you like it or not. We'll take a vote later. It's a partnership model. We work closely with people. Okay, we don't sort of throw it over the wall to you and say, here it is, enjoy. We started out by working first with the KW Volunteer Action Center in 2005, and that was an interesting journey. We learned a lot from each other, and I think put together something that worked pretty effectively. I'm told by Jane Hennig that people seeking volunteer positions went up by 500% in our area in that time period. The other part of it is when we work with organizations, it's what we call white labeled, which means that it can be tailored to fit your situation, and I'll show you a little bit of that. Next. Okay, let's describe how it works a little bit. Live, I would have given a live demonstration, except that every time you do a live demonstration, they fail, as you know. Something goes wrong. I mean, even now I'm worrying about that projector. First of all, a volunteer describes their interests. And here's a list of interests, animals, pets, counseling, conflict, events, fundraising, etc. Now, that list is peculiar to our area, okay? It's Kitchener-Waterloo. This is the KW Volunteer Action Center screenshot. Once they've described their interest, next, they describe themselves. And you don't have to give very much information. I can't even remember how much you give. Kyle, what? Age, gender, is it?
Age, gender, and whether you're volunteering as an individual or...
Right, okay, so that's it. Age, gender, volunteering as a group. It used to be you had to give your postal code because that's the way they raised funds, but that's gone away. Next. Once you've created your profile, you can save it for new positions, so that if new positions come up, you can email. At one point we thought, gee, we should probably phone people or send them a fax, but forget that idea. Just virtually everybody's on email, or if it's like my wife, she uses me as her email drop, so, which reminds me I have to tell her she has a lunch date when I get home. After that, the system can be easily tailored. This is Kingston, which is Addington, Lennox, et cetera, et cetera. I can never keep it all straight. This is the Kingston area, and you can see the list is different. Okay. Now they don't have it on there that I can see, but an obvious one would be teaching sailing, right? They've got recreation and sports, so maybe that's buried underneath that category somehow. And if you can hit the next, and it just says that, different areas of interest for the community. So this is sort of how you describe yourself. Next. And then in the one I did a description. I did it so I didn't get too many, a long list. I only got 2 jobs in this case. And I think I picked the second one. I don't know if you can read it, but it says Volunteer Consultants, Economics for Success. Let's see what happens next. And here is the volunteer position. And it gives you a pretty good description. It also tells you how to apply. You don't obviously apply to the Volunteer Center. You go directly to them once you've discovered the position. The other point is that it's we could have mapping in here and things to show where things are. I just didn't bother showing it. It's not that big a deal. Next. And then, of course, the last one is, as an organization, you are creating, as a volunteer organization as opposed to a volunteer center, you are asking for volunteers. You are creating descriptions. And this is the kind of form you fill out. I couldn't get the whole form on the slide, but you got the flavor of it. This is the create the position. And of course, there's a problem with you as a volunteer organization. You create the position, but does it fit local custom? Are there any legal requirements you've missed? Certain volunteer positions require police checks, for example, that kind of thing. So if you can just put the next one up there. So the volunteer center then takes this piece of information and vets it for appeal. Does it sound right? They know stuff you don't know. For example, it may be that nobody volunteers for positions the last 6 months. So there's no point in advertising a 6-month position. You might as well advertise a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or whatever, or a year maybe, whatever makes sense. And then there's legal, and then there's local requirements. Maybe if you volunteer for Oktoberfest, you have to be a non-drinker. I don't know, for example, around our area. So that's one part of it. Of course, in the good old days, this used to be going back and forth via fax until everybody was happy with it, and then it was finally faxed out to all those places I told you about before. Of course, now you just work on a shared copy until everybody's happy, and then it's released to the database. Now, there's another part to this. As you put in a volunteer position, that volunteer position becomes stale after a while in terms of there's more recent ones go in. So how do we present volunteer positions? In random order? No, we present them by freshest first. Okay, so there's an issue there, but you can game the system by going in and editing your position, okay, because then it becomes a re-admission to the system, and you are allowed to move to the top of the list. So it's just like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with search engine optimization, but the idea being that you can game Google. Of course, Google is constantly sitting there ungaming you, and so it is literally a game in the sense you're playing against them. Okay, so that's one last piece is we collect data and various things, age, gender, group versus individual interests, volunteering areas of interest, duration. So we're making a discovery. Virtually everybody goes for 3-month positions. Okay, well, that's a very valuable piece of information. Geographical areas, where are the people volunteering from? Why aren't we getting them from this area? Maybe we should put in some kind of, I'll call it marketing effort to get volunteers. I think the word I heard yesterday was community engagement, but so it can assist in this data can assist in lots of different things, and of course each volunteer center is in a different geographic location, has different sets of rules under how they operate. I mean, they all work in the same general way, but there will be specifics. So you can imagine funding requests. In our area, for example, the funding was based at one point in time, not anymore as I understand it, correct me, Jane, if I'm wrong, but it was based on the idea that where the volunteers were coming from. So if they came from Waterloo rather than Kitchener, Waterloo had to kick in more. And then, of course, things like volunteer position descriptions. There will be certain things that just don't fly. You have to find out what they are. All righty, thank you. And then there's volunteer recognition. And why do you want to recognize volunteers? I came up with 3 reasons. You might come up with 10 more. You're the experts at this, not me. You want to recognize volunteers, basically. One is a big one, background for employment, particularly the immigrant population, but I assume it applies to the population in general, but they come in, they want to learn how the system works, and one way to do it is to volunteer. Another one is, of course, the old 40-hour requirement in high schools, and some professions also have requirements, or they may not have requirements, but they are nudged in that direction. For instance, accountants are nudged quite strongly in that direction. And then some people just want to be recognized. Somebody said last night, why did you volunteer? It felt good. I really felt good about doing it. Well, it's nice to have something that says, and here's recognition that I felt good. Or here's recognition that I helped society. It depends on your point of view. There's lots of different viewpoints on that. And of course, not everyone can receive a major award. And one of my colleagues was reading over some of the work we put together, and she discovered a report, I think it was from Volunteer Canada, if I remember correctly. And basically that report said, most people don't want to go to a banquet, which is rather interesting. I haven't read the full report myself, I just glanced through it. But the other thing, of course, is obviously you want to do volunteer recognition, so you want to create something, certificate, you got to make it simple. I mean, you want to minimize the cost, you want to minimize the labor involved, and you want to minimize the need for expertise. If it's harder than Microsoft Word, so to speak, then it's probably too hard. Because I mean, that's not what you're doing. This is sort of an add-on, and so you've got to make sure that it's done in an appropriate way. Of course, you want to have some kind of standards because you want to be able to compare recognition from one place to another. I hate standards because there are so many to choose from. But nevertheless, you have to have some way of doing things so they're comparable. And so we've based this one on the National Occupation Classification, and it seems to work quite well. I was amazed at how rich it was. And of course, the whole thing is based on the PREB system, which was developed by the Volunteer Action Center in Quebec, or Centre d'Action Bénévole de Québec. Is Catherine here? Nope. Oh, there you are. I haven't spoken much French in a long time. I used to work in northern Quebec many years ago. Now, how do we create a certificate? Well, this is the kind of input you do, and we're still, we did a beta test here of this thing to get some feedback from people, because after all, you're the ultimate users. We just make it. And so we're still fussing a little bit with some of the details here. But basically, the obvious things, position type, who's getting it, who supervised them, what the job was, job title, et cetera. And then there's an ability down here to add little footnotes, if you will, things that people did. And if you go to the next one, I think. Oh, and then we have, that just shows the NOC codes are used for the job classification. And I think, but I'm not 100% sure, that we'll allow people to add things. We're still groping with that one, because as soon as you let people add things, then things have the potential to get out of control. And that's not necessarily bad, but you should recognize that it's going to happen. Next one. So here's the certificate. Now, we used the Quebec certificates as examples. This is the one office assistant at reception, the tasks, activities, the competencies and skills, the number of hours, the period, et cetera. That's side one. You have to have, I don't know how you do this. If you frame it hanging on the wall, you have to turn it around every week, I guess. And then there's a side two, which is sort of the footnotes to the whole idea.
You have to use it. Not only put it in the frame.
So that's where we are now. We now have some fun, because, how can I say it? This is great, let's say, for where I am, Kitchener-Waterloo, but what about the rest of Ontario? How do you, first of all, how do people even find out how to volunteer? How do you even know a volunteer center exists? I want to volunteer. How do I get engaged? Well, actually, one way to do it is to join a service club, isn't it? Because service clubs often engage with the community in various ways. But it's an interesting question. How do I find a way to volunteer? And I said, how do I find a volunteer portal? I search, but it may not be that visible. So what we need to do is create a volunteer portal for all of Ontario, because then we can afford to make it visible, because now we can focus a bit of cash on search engine optimization, potential advertising, and what have you. The problem with that, of course, is it's all of Ontario. And that's scary, because frankly, when you do something for all of, when it gets to be a place as big as Ontario, you can create a lot of problems for yourself. You lose the community feel, for one thing. So we're very conscious of that. But the idea is to create a portal which will work for the Ontario Volunteer Center Network, OVCN, and will also map over to Find Help. Now, Find Help's doing other things. I'm not sure of all the things they're doing, but I know they are doing other things on top of that. But there'll be two hotspots where you can link to volunteer positions. And they'll contain all the volunteer positions for Ontario. And they'll also point to all the volunteer centers. So if I'm in Quinte, I'll be able to find where Quinte Center is and how to get to it. Can I go to the next one? However, We've got to keep the community feel. That's, to me, that's essential. So how do we maintain the local connection? Well, the positions come up from you, they don't come down from the top. Okay, this is not a top-down system, this is a bottom-up system. You feed the OVCN portal. There may be some rules on how you feed it, hopefully minimal. Obviously a little bit of standardization just so that we can communicate easily, but we're trying to minimize it as much as possible. Excuse me, as much as possible. But there's an issue. We have, I think it's 24 volunteer centers in Ontario, plus lots of places where one doesn't exist. So the volunteer centers in Ontario use different software. 2 or 3 of them use ours. There's CEOC, which has been around since the 90s, as I remember it. I engaged with them very early on. There's one called, it used to be called Volunteer Squared, it's now called Better Impact. And then I put others, because there's a few other ones out there as well. And this is the only piece of geek speak in the whole talk, I swear. We will develop ways to transfer the information from the local volunteer centers to this master one. Okay, so remember, bottom up, not top down. Very important. They're called APIs, or Application Program Interfaces, if you really want to know. And basically, it's pretty well all working, but it's not ready for prime time yet. It's not ready to be made available to the public. That true, Kyle? That's what he told me last week. And of course, there are communities, currently, I think Stratford Perth is one example, that do not have a volunteer center at the moment. They may evolve one very shortly, I wouldn't be surprised. But they can use the OVCN portal directly to post their position. So we can take care of the haves and the have-nots, if you will, to put it in simple terms. So that's how we're going to maintain the community feel. You are in charge of it, and the people looking for positions will be able to go down to your particular portal. If we have to strip out some information, they'll be able to go and get the full pile of information. Next. Recognition is a little simpler in one sense. We don't have any competition. There are no other systems out there that I'm aware of. So recognition, again, is at the community level, because that's where people know each other. But we can arrange it now so OVCN runs the recognition portal. That is, it's run at the Ontario level, but the communication and interaction is still at the community level. It's open to, excuse me. It's open to nonprofits and volunteer centers. We'll train both the volunteer centers and the nonprofits to generate certificates. So there will be training. You cannot generate a certificate without having a star on your forehead that says you can do it. Once we've generated the local certificate, a version of that will be uploaded to the PREB system in Quebec, which will be the national system, so to speak. So if something goes wrong somewhere, we have a version that people can get at. Of course, there's need for training, and we just did some of that at this conference, again, with the idea of finding out what we've messed up, so to get it better. And of course, the certificate itself is accessible to the volunteer, but only their certificate, obviously not anybody else's. And they can't change it. All they can do is get a copy of it. So, if they're going to an employment interview and this appears to be important to them for that interview, they can take the certificate with them. Yeah. Okay, I sort of put some advantages here. One big one is local control. You're in charge. Another one is connecting to other systems, and I'll tell you about that in a moment, but describing our own experience. We have both individual and group volunteering, and because we're together, there's lots of pots of money we can go after that we couldn't get at before. Oh, gee, you're Kitchener-Waterloo. No, we're Ontario. Oh, and suddenly, let's say a lot more money becomes accessible. I'm not saying available, but accessible. Another one, sharing good practices. You can try out things at the local level and then they can bubble up where people can get at them. I keep trying to put in best practices, but I keep getting my wrist slapped and told it should be good practices, because there's no best practices. We can also pilot ideas at the local level and then bubble them up if we want to. And one issue we had we've done in our area is Wilfrid Laurier University has a huge volunteer program, hundreds of students if I remember correctly. And they said, oh, you've got volunteer positions. Could our students use those volunteer positions? So we've actually connected the two organizations together, and positions that are available to university and college students, they can get at and get at through their portal. School boards could have a similar problem with their 40-hour requirement. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. So we have set up to other organizations, but now rather than connecting that portal to the individual ones at the community level, let's just connect them to the one in the Ontario level. It makes more sense and it's a lot easier to do, and I can't see any disadvantage to doing it. One other thing that happened to us is we discovered that there were organizations that had capacity, such as one day a week of marketing capacity, and they wanted to make it available to the world. So we sort of turned the marriage broker system upside down. Next. I should end by giving special thanks, of course, to the people who put the money into both PREBS and the Volunteer Attract connection system. Of course, our friends in Quebec who provided the original impetus to make the PREB Ontario happen, and we're standing on their shoulders, not on their toes, in that they've done a lot of work, and now, you know, and by interacting back and forth, we found ways we can hopefully make things even better. And of course, Volunteer Canada, the Ontario Volunteer Centre Network, OVCN, and the Kitchener-Waterloo Volunteer Action Centre for pulling together all the people to make this happen. I mean, this is incredible. It really is incredible. And the other part is having a lot of faith. A lot of faith, actually, because we really are moving ahead in this area in an interesting way. And I think we may very well find ourselves world leaders in this before very long, once this system is going. And we hope that's by the end of this year. Okay, thank you. One thing I should mention, I don't know if you received one or not. I don't even know who I sent it to, but I sent the paper to somebody, and I don't know if it's been distributed here or printed or what have you, probably, maybe not. If it hasn't, well, there's a better version now on, so I can supply you with the better version. And if anyone wants to send me an email, I'll be glad to supply the better version. It's just, I discovered a few minor glitches and I thought, let's clean it up, so. And I'm open to questions. My goodness, that worked out well. Yes? Okay.
Given the people in the room, I think it's a great opportunity for you to perhaps explain a little bit more about volunteer track, and specifically the pricing.
Oh, sure.
A lot of
You want to go a couple more slides?
on the verge of selecting a new system or moving away from their current
One,
system.
this is a list of the participating volunteer centers. Keep going. One more. Yeah, there we are. Glad you asked that question. Basically, here is the price list for volunteer track. We have, the first time around, because it's, quote, white labeled, meaning we have to fix it up for your environment, there is a fee of $5,000. From that point on, the operational cost is $1,200 a year. Basically, we are operating it in what, to use the geek speak, is a cloud. So your stuff sits out there somewhere, you don't know where. It's actually in Kitchener-Waterloo. No, maybe it isn't right now. Markham, right? They moved the center. But the point is, it's accessible to you. Your portion is only accessible to you, okay? So obviously, Kitchener-Waterloo can't go in and change Quinte, for example. That's just not on. And that's for communities up to 500,000 people. After that, we just a little bit worried about scaling. So for instance, if we took on Toronto, we'd want to look at it a little more carefully because they are a monster compared to most cities in terms of their size. We don't have a price, of course, for the recognition software yet because we're still working on it. All I can say is it won't be expensive. You know, it will be 5 cents a certificate, 50 cents a certificate, or what pricing model will we come up with? I'm not 100% sure of that at this point. The only thing is our goal is to minimize the cost. Yeah.
I'm just a little confused about, is volunteer track and Spark Ontario and OBC and Cornwall all the same thing, or are they three things totally?
Sorry, can you speak up just a bit?
The volunteer track and Gateway, Spark, and OBC and Cornwall, are they all the same thing, or are they three things doing the same thing? I'm confused about that.
Well, I'll let somebody else ask that because I'm not even sure of the acronyms.
They're three different things that work together and support each other and make things more accessible.
So you can have the portal without having, Spark or the volunteer track to participate in the portal.
Right.
And Spark.
Yes. Yeah, you can pick and choose how you,
Yeah.
Here's my question around
craft for the recognition. Does this mean that the organizations that we train are going to have to pay?
What Don was referring there is if we go out and work with other provinces. So if we're working with Corinne nationally and can go out to another province to roll this out as their specialized one, how do we price that out from what we've learned here and what we've learned from national?
Okay.
It's free, but as a volunteer center, you can charge for the training.
Yeah, I get that. I just didn't want
Yeah, no.
to train a bunch of
Oh, no.
nonprofits and then
No.
them
absolutely.
have to
Yeah.
Yeah.
pay for it.
No, I mean, there's a balancing act.
Telling them.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's a balancing act here, you know, for instance, you have to keep yourself alive, you have to, you're offering services, you must realize income somehow from those services, you gotta pay the people. And how do you make that happen?
And I think then that there is an option, if you are dealing with a lot of very small organizations, members that wouldn't have the capacity to perhaps issue the certificates, that for a fee for service, the volunteer center can take that on. So that's another way of potentially
Sure.
having some income and
Yep.
a source of revenue down the road.
I just didn't want to train them and then all of a sudden,
No.
6 months down the road, they start getting
No,
billed
so
without
as-
giving them a heads up.
No.
Because I
No.
put
But
myself in
as,
that.
No, we're working through what I'll call a very sensible policy to make sure that this kind of thing
And
doesn't
as
happen.
part of prep, certainly for the duration of the contract, but then even it's 5 years, right? For an extra 5 years, we have to make sure, the OCN has to make sure that that sustainability is there so that we can continue to offer the software at no cost to the organization.
Yeah, we are also looking at other sustainability models too, which I can't share at the moment because they're pretty preliminary, but.
So there's going to be a charge for prep
No,
going forward to
the idea
centers?
is that there would never be a cost, but it's the responsibility of the OPCN to find that sustainability.
Yeah.
And Don's gonna help us with that.
And,
Right, Don?
and that's where
Yep.
Don is alluding, a part of this is that there has been interest from other provinces in Canada for potentially an optimized system there, and we've learned a lot working in Ontario here. So is there a model that we can price out then to go in and work with the next province that helps fund what's been done here?
Yep. Yep.
So just so I understand, so we heard about the gateway yesterday, which is a provincial,
You're talking about the Find Help Gateway, yes.
provincial aggregate of all the various systems that we use, all of the technologies that we aggregated that on a provincial database. And then there's the
One
portal,
more slide.
which,
So was that top one?
Two more.
Okay, just so we.
and then there's this, there's an OPCN portal, which is different, but also provincial.
Yeah, do you want to see, there's a picture up here that'll show you exactly what's going on. Oh, one more, no, sorry, no, one more. That's it. Okay.
Be a devil's advocate,
The-
why were
The volunteer,
gateway do we
no, no,
also aggregating
No.
someplace else?
No, they're running through the portal.
no. If you go to the top where it says Volunteer Gateway, that's Find Help, okay? If you go down one level, You see OVCN? Find Help is going to aggregate other stuff that I don't really know enough about to comment. But the OVCN portal and the Volunteer Gateway will talk to each other. They will both have a copy of the same thing. And then the OVCN portal will act as a collecting point for everybody in Ontario. Okay, so that's how it's going to work.
So the point of doing the portal is that the gateway could aggregate just from the volunteer centers and make that arrangement. But then we wouldn't have an ease of doing that with other places like Poppy's software or, you know, somebody else's. So what we're doing is we're making the OVCN portal so that we have an ease to facilitate connections with multiple partners in the future.
As a group.
Right, and so the gateway has allowed us to do this because it makes sense for them and it's much easier for them to do one point of connection with volunteer centers rather than 24.
Yep.
But the 24 have to aggregate up somehow, and that gives us all kinds of flexibility for the future to do other things. And it also gives us the control to say when we want it to go there and when we want it to go there. So we're maintaining control for our members as well.
Yeah, the volunteer community's in control, if I can put it that way.
The other advantage too with the local level of the OVCN portal is that's a different software that's out there. CEOC has an API in it that somebody else can talk to. If you're digging into better impact, they do not have that, and their policies right now are not allowing a third-party API to interface with that. So we're doing some screen scraping technology to break up those positions. So now Quincy, who's running better impact, if there is another local one they want to connect with, they would have the ability to once more use the OVCN one just to share their data with whoever community partners that they want to work with.
By the way, screen scraping just,
Screenshot is where it
yeah.
is going.
Screen scraping just means exactly that. You take the whole screen full of information, you just grab it and then take it apart. Okay, and
iframe.
Is it going, how do I say this? Because we deal with Find Help, right? So each week, one of my staff members uploads so many records to Find Help.
Right.
On the information piece. Is this something that we're gonna have to also do on the volunteer side, or is it that somebody's gonna go in and grab it for us?
basically, you're either going to push it or we're going to pull it, depending on on your situation. In your case, we will grab it.
Okay.
And it will be done automatically once a day that we're looking for updates, deletions, new postings. And that's in most cases in the centers. I know the CEOC users, so such as Guelph, we're already tied in there that we can go in once a day, automatically just start doing this.
You don't have to send it in.
You don't have to
So
do the
w-
actual-
If a
Okay,
center
that's what my
feels-
question was.
We are not-
I know that with what we do with Find Help, that's part of Diane's job that she has to.
Yeah.
No, we're trying to
We-
make this as simple and easy
Yeah,
as
no, that's
possible, so
perfect.
nobody is adding more
That
work to
somebody
their
grabs it.
schedule to share this.
Yeah.
But as a collective group, you guys then are gaining a valuable
So,
resource here.
so right now with our system, we're volunteer tracked, but we have APIs through Kyle's development that send and pull data from about 4 different places now. The portal will be another and the gateway. And basically, our members put in their position. They tell us where they want it shared, and then we don't touch it. We don't see it after that.
But we're just out of curiosity, what is informal volunteer organizations?
I'm sorry?
Just in the last, what is that informal volunteer organization?
Well, in that case, it just groups that somehow have formed but aren't really volunteer organizations. They're volunteer organizations in the sense that they're just going directly and posting their position to the
So it
OVCN.
might be an area that doesn't have a volunteer center, like Stratford, that
Yeah.
go on and post
Yep.
directly.
Still not-for-profit
Yeah.
organizations?
Yeah, so let's say the Stratford Library is looking for volunteers. They could go directly to the
Because
OVCN
they
one,
don't have a volunteer.
because they don't have a volunteer center yet.
But not if they have a volunteer center, can they upload or get?
The plan is that they would go through the volunteer center, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I just wanted to safeguard our.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, and so, yeah, that's part of the policy stuff that we were talking about on Monday,
is that, you know, it's only where volunteer center services don't exist,
Yeah.
otherwise they need to go through, and,
Okay.
yeah.
Just what does the acronym API actually stand for?
Application Programming Interface. If you look it up, Google will tell you. You just type in API and up comes the Wikipedia.
And Jane, when you're talking about
Entry.
your APIs, you're meaning like the university, the colleges, or whoever you're already sending to?
They're already sending stuff, and what we're doing now is creating, well, they actually exist for, there's two parts to so-called API. One is the piece where you grab the information, and the other piece is where you put it in from below. And most of that is implemented. It's just now a case of spreading it around all 24 organizations. And there's 2 or 3 different versions of it.
So right now, Kyle, you can correct me, they basically have, they know how to get data from every one of the systems. It's just a matter of you giving permission to Kyle and the team to take that information and put it, and move it into the portal. And then they'll work with you on how that takes place.
And is there any paperwork or anything going along with that we take to our boards or?
We have not talked about that.
No, but I think it's part of your prep agreement that, isn't it, Cody, in the agreement that you signed on Monday? Do we have something in there where it's, because we're drawing on the different systems, I can't remember now whether, no?
We
No.
should have some
No.
paperwork for you to take
Well,
to your
just because
board.
a prep certificate is that's a whole different ballgame than giving
Yeah.
you information.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, we could draw up some kind of memorandum of
I
understanding.
think everybody probably needs it, not just.
Yeah, but it's, it's very straightforward. Basically, all you're doing is giving us a user ID and a password into your system.
Okay, but the thing is, from a law firm point of view, if we've already given our information to 211, they're paying us for that.
That's different information.
But this is to benefit you, not
No,
just.
I know, but I'm saying, when we go back to our boards and whatever, they're gonna say, wait a minute, for 211, we get paid for this information. So, I'm just putting it out there.
The volunteer part is completely
Yes,
different.
oh no, I agree with you in terms of, we'll have more.
Wait, what you're doing is you have to sell it to your board.
Yeah,
So I
that's
understand.
what I'm saying, we need something, I think, a bit more formal than,
Yeah, yeah, it's a totally different game, but I understand what you're saying. It's a bit like saying not-for-profits can't make money, I mean. that-
Yeah, and I'm sure other people have,
I mean, just coming from, we do both, so we
Yeah.
get funding for 211, but they pay us to update, maintain
yes.
Sure.
those records. Where I see it differently on the volunteer side, because the agencies input the
Yeah.
information. Our mandate is to recruit and refer, right?
Yeah.
So we can't charge, nor should anybody be paying us for, they're really not our records, they're the agency's records.
Yeah.
They're using us as a tool, and we're expanding that tool to a
Broadening,
broader,
If you pay membership, if your
Yeah.
not-for-profits pay membership,
yeah.
but
Yes.
not all volunteer centers charge membership. So we
But
do,
then
we
But
do
still,
post
your
them.
mission and mandate is to recruit and refer, right? And to be the voice, like, you're supposed to promote,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And this is a promotional tool.
Yes, oh, no, I 100%
So-
agree, but,
But I'm just saying, like, when you're
Yeah.
talking to your board.
yeah.
You gotta get the right sales pitch, if I can say it that
Yeah,
way.
no, I agree with you totally, I understand what you're saying.
Absolutely, I get what you're
but-
saying,
yeah.
Kelly, and we need to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just honestly, because it's never been an issue for us.
Yes.
I have never thought of it. And so I rely on.
Oops, sorry.
You have multiple services and so on to tell me what you need.
And the other part of it is it protects us, that if what we're saying is that so-and-so and so-and-so is allowed to use our data. If somebody outside of that uses our data in an inappropriate way, we have a contract that protects us, that we're saying we didn't allow, this is who we allowed to use our data.
If it's on the internet, anyone can use it.
Well, yeah, they can.
Yeah, anyone can scrape a screen, basically,
Yeah.
if they
But
want
it's
to.
still, it's a.
Yeah.
But we
it's
want
due
to do it with your
diligence.
permission, not
Yes.
against
Yeah,
your
yeah.
permission, right?
It's due diligence.
Yep.
The legal
Yep.
ramifications of it.
I'm going to leave that with these folks. I understand your problem, but they're probably better equipped to handle it than I am. You good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? or-
Yeah, I have
sorry.
another question. With volunteer track, what's the timing for implementation? What are you looking at?
It's already implemented.
No,
Uh,
I mean, like, if we were to want to purchase volunteer track,
Well, I'm sorry, if
if we wanted to move from CEOC to volunteer track,
Right.
what's the timeline for implementation?
Probably would be about a month from start to finish. You need to set down the rules of what you want them. Then there'll be the step of migrating data over and going live. But a lot of it's upfront is just figuring out because
Yeah.
the volunteer track does have several different ways into the data and different pieces around what all you want to use out of the package. And once you're picking apart, it doesn't exclude that you could use them down the road. But
Right.
that initial startup of what you want to go live with.
Right.
That seems to be the back and forth conversation that take a little longer and sometimes for a volunteer center then to go back and think about those features of what they want to do.
And I guess there's two parts to this. One is the talk, which doesn't change your operation one bit, and then there's the implementation of what was decided.
Right.
And how long would that take, Kyle?
It's probably once we've got the features figured out, the silent order and the data moving, it is actually be done in 1 week whole time period in there.
Okay.
But some of the talk on that before, I would say, like,
Yeah.
the whole package there.
Yeah, because a fair amount of back and forth is, because we have to educate you to a certain extent, and then you have to come back to us and say, I didn't understand that, and eventually we home in on, as Kyle says, that's 3 weeks, and then, but you're still live, and you're still live until a cutover day, when all of a sudden we say, oh, shut this one down, bring this one up. So it doesn't, might affect you for a few hours, I guess. Is that fair, Kyle? Oop. I haven't got his attention. Sorry?
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, I wasn't sure, CEOC, volunteer track could replace CEOC is what I gathered. But
Well, it
doesn't
could.
do-
I
but
mean-
it doesn't do the information side for a center that does information and volunteer side.
It is strictly a volunteer
Volunteer side, that's-
attraction side that is a marriage broker, as I call it,
And you
Okay.
can do it because
But-
we're CEOC, but we don't use CEOC volunteers. You don't have to.
And,
Kyle, just to, there's another part of the question here. I mean, the current system is not impacted in the sense it's only going to take us a couple of hours to cut over. We do everything offline and then throw the big switch, if you will, and pray a little.
So, like I was going to say, an example, when Kingston went up, we discussed which pieces they wanted. They came up with their list of areas of interest that they wanted. Once more, Jane can attest that her staff can change all that. There is forms to make it easy, but once more, it was just Bill at that time down in Kingston, so it was easier for him to send me a Word one with all that. So that was that week before I was prepping that, showed him, here's your areas of interest, a few other those things, and so then when we were ready, we cut live, they put it into the site.
So you can actually preview what you're going to get before you get it, so to speak.
And then once it's implemented and you pay your subsequent annual fee, if changes happen to the system, you come up with updates. The way CEOC works is that you pay for that, right? So because it's
The updates just happen to everybody, except where it affects only you. In other words, something different about your specific site than it would, but
what I guess what I'm getting at.
Right now, a lot of the models that we've gone after with improvements have been either Jane has gone after trillium funding for certain pieces that she wants added, Kingston has gone after that, but there's sort of been an agreement there. Then once they're in the system, those are new options inside the system that a center could turn on. So there was the good practice bank that Jane has done that was trillium funded.
No, community.
Community funding. Good trillium funding is what we're going for the skills or jobs.
Skills-based.
Piece that we're working at there, so the volunteer track will have the whole skills base and everything.
Yep.
But once that's complete, that is part of the system.
Which is a huge advantage.
Yeah, so,
And that's where Don was talking about, as we work as a group, if we get more on, it can open up bigger pots.
Right.
Because now Jane can partner with the OVCN to go for a grant to flush out volunteer tract as well. Or if we're looking at credit, we can partner with Corinne to go nationally, and that again for some other money, how to flush out credit for Ontario.
yeah, so basically, if you want something brand new that is not in the system, then we figure out some way to pay for it, and the usual way is to go after some granting body. We put it in, and then we can say to everybody, you know, that's sort of the agreement, it's available to anybody who wants it.
And we've had upgrades that way when they've done, you know, when we first started, there was no mapping component, but they had a couple of options of mapping components that they added in for a non-volunteer center, and they just said, do you want it? And we said, sure.
So it is all the research, so other tools that we're working for, so even some of this is coming from the profit sector. So we've got a partner that says, we've got one right now where graphing is coming in, if they want charting and graphing tools, and that will then suddenly be part of the package that you can turn on if you want in certain areas.
Are we gonna get this presentation then to see your partners that you
I'm sorry?
already have?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Are we going to get the presentation where you already have the list of partners that you already have on?
I could make it available. Basically, we've talked to every volunteer center in some way, and, you know, we're at different stages of,
Okay, so the list that you showed us previously?
is the 24 volunteer centers in Ontario.
Oh, I see, okay,
Okay.
they're not necessarily on.
No, we've got the first, is it 8 on board?
8 already signed up?
I mean, everybody's signed up to a certain extent, but the first 8 are really signed up, so to speak.
Yeah, so who is actually using that as their main?
Also the volunteer track part?
Yes.
So when you're, what Kyle is going to be coming after you for
Yes.
is not that, that's for the portal.
Yes, no, I know,
Yeah.
I understand that,
But
but
for
how many people
volunteer
are using-
tract?
Yeah, volunteer tract.
We've
at
got
this point?
Kingston running it right now, we have Jane Volunteer
KI.
Action Center, and then the OVCN is using it for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can